Okay, folks, so I am so excited to introduce Dr. Jonathan. He's become a friend. I hope that's okay to say. We've known each other over 2 years. He's helped me enormously in my journey of trying to figure out how to really bring metrics and finance and structure to how we look at culture and how we get buy-in from folks who may not be bought in on why we need things like DEIB or why we need safe workplaces. And so I'm really excited to introduce a real expert, someone who has now 400 podcasts, I believe, under his belt and has helped people all over the world. I think longest running podcast in well, I would say US, that would be US centric, but worldwide. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, first off, thank you, Kim. Thanks for inviting me to come here. Yes, so the podcast is The Element of Inclusion. This week is episode 418.
My
And
goodness.
so I always say we're the longest running inclusion podcast in the world. I would say I think it's less than 40% of our audience is from the US in particular, but we've
Wow.
got people from 166 countries.
Oh my goodness. Well, now in addition to that, I know that you also help individuals. You help me personally. This is how we first met. And I came to you with a unique problem where I was looking at parts of the organization where we really didn't have the same access to opportunity. And I really wanted to fix that, had no idea how. But you really kind of came in and helped me. And I know a lot of people kind of come to you in this space. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and Kim, you're our archetype for the our great client, our perfect client. And I think you describe it well because you're motivated, you're human first, people first. So you actually care about the people and the issues, but you're looking for different ways and you're open enough to explore things. So typically, when people approach us, it's not because, oh, this is important and I really want to do something. Normally, they've tried something. So we put so much stuff out there on the podcast and everything. There's stuff that everybody, excuse me, there is stuff that everybody can try for themselves, which is great. Often people will try something and think, well, that went well. I would like more. Or this is the other thing. The other people who come are people who have been hurt, they've been burned, they've been damaged. Maybe your reputation is at risk. Maybe you've got a painful problem at work that you're struggling with. Sometimes you've even worked with somebody else and it didn't go the way that you wanted. And I've got very unpopular ways of talking about sort of DEI or mainstream DEI narratives. We talk about flags, food, and fun,
Mhm.
parties, parades, panel events. These were things that when we met and when you approached us, you weren't thinking or speaking in those terms. You were being very insightful. You wanted precision. You wanted things to get done. Those are the people who we tend to work with. Typically, the ones who want to, like I say, have a party, trying to win an award. Those aren't the people who work with us. They often go to other places, but the big thing is they don't get results that the business cares about. And that's a huge part of what I'm trying to achieve and what I want you to achieve when you're creating an inclusive workplace. It has to mean something. And what I do is guide people like you to find that meaning for yourselves.
I love that. And I think you're pointing to a bigger problem within HR. So many times we see HR is in a weak position, a disrespected position. A lot of times with small companies, they're hiring kind of like a secretary who is planning birthday parties, who is handing you your paperwork to apply for a job or to get your benefits. And maybe they evolve into something more than that. But those types of individuals are typically not set up well to deal with the really hard, tough things that can come up with, say, discrimination or lawsuits or some of these other matters. And a lot of times, too, if they're showing up in this particular way, it's usually a signal that the top of that organization doesn't really respect that function. And so for HR folks and for people who are wanting to help their HR folks, build up a better client, build up a better climate, they really need to figure out kind of how to learn to speak that language. They may be more respected in other parts of the organization. And so you have this really impressive finance background, but you also showed us some tips and tricks about making an evidence-based case, not just leaning on, hey, this is moral, hey, this is the right thing to do, or people really care about this. Because sadly, that's not what persuades a lot of executives out there who are laser focused on the bottom line. So can you tell me a little bit about that, about how you help people in that area?
Yeah, and I think this is where I have to volunteer my background and my bias as well. And you touched on that. And I want to take it in a different direction for a second, because you did pick up on the idea that HR isn't always respected.
Mhm.
So I've got an accounting background. I used to be an auditor as well. So I literally used to visit small, medium-sized businesses, and I would look under the hood. I would see what worked. And I'm
Yeah.
getting that from the people who run the business. So I heard how they spoke versus how the accountants spoke and the other members of the team, what they were focused on all of the time. And you will notice this, and maybe this is one for the audience. If you think about accounting or accountants, they often make it to the top of the business. And I don't just mean like a CFO.
Mhm.
It's not unusual to have heard of a CEO, right? Who used to be an accountant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not an inconceivable thing. You don't always hear that about people in HR. It's not common. And
Right.
it's out there. And I hope everyone has got at least 1, 2, 10 examples. But in my experience, and remember, let's go back to what I just said. I used to visit companies
Mhm.
every single week. You don't meet many HR people. So the special ones that do have that strong influence, have that strong power
Mhm.
in guiding the organization, they're able to manage that language and speak to people, leaders in particular, in a way that matters to them. And so when you talk about evidence, I'm also drawing from my accounting background, because I would hear stories all the time. We're going to do well. It's going to be great. Everything's going to work out. I want to see evidence. I want a receipt. I want a letter. You said that these 10 clients, again, it's all going to happen. I used to work with salespeople as well at the year end, right? They're telling you, it's okay, that deal's coming through. I need an email. I need a
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah, even it's okay. Let me speak to them. We
Yeah.
can even do that. But so you started to see evidence makes a difference. I was always looking, I listen to your story, I hear you, I understand. My job was often to translate what was going on, but I need you to provide documentation or something that I could take to someone who doesn't care. And I think that's a big thing when we're talking about things like inclusion in the workplace. I hear you. In the moment, everyone's very compelling. Everybody's very motivated. Everyone's very passionate. But can I explain exactly what you've just said to somebody else in the business who wasn't there and doesn't care? And
Right.
evidence allows you to do that. And we can go into all different types of evidence. The point is, and what I would say is, if you're deliberately trying to get evidence, you are going to be in a stronger position than anyone else. And we use the system evidence-based inclusion. We want you to gather evidence from 4 key places. And we did one of these together, Kim, which
Yes.
number one was research.
Yeah.
You would be amazed at what the research says out there about a problem that you are facing. Sometimes it's a better way of describing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there will be just documents, there will be data that you haven't even encountered that explains some of the challenges that you are facing. So you should do that. Researchers, by the way, they're notoriously easy to get in contact with because no one reads their research. Nobody talks about it. If you encounter a piece of research that you think is useful, trust me, reach out to that professor. They will be delighted for you to get in contact with them. So one's the research. The second one is the one where you normally start, which is the organization. So you're looking at any data or evidence that you can gather from the organization. A lot of people sit on pulse surveys and the staff surveys. That's great, but is there anything else that you have? Always look for other things there. But I tend not to dwell on that because that's where most people look at. The other thing is expertise. You want expertise, people who are basically experts, they've got knowledge, they've got a stronger reason. And typically, I look for people who suffer when they get things wrong, right? So if I wanted to understand interest rates,
Mhm.
I wouldn't go to a journalist, I would ask someone who's likely to suffer if they get that question wrong.
Right.
So if you've got an issue that you're dealing with in your workplace, who is going to suffer if they get that wrong? These are
That's
the sorts of
compelling.
people I look at. And then the
Yeah.
final one, which is the big one, is stakeholders, people who are
Mhm.
affected by the decision you're about to make, the issues that you're facing. Gather evidence from them. Makes a huge difference. Honestly, if you try that in the next year, in the next 6 months, it will make a huge difference to your decision-making process.
That was really incredible. And I know what we did together was also really incredible. It's one of the things I am most proud of in all my work that I've done in HR. But in particular, what we did is we took a sales team that was pretty homogeneous. Like there was not a lot of diversity there. And we did a whole bunch of research, and you guided us through every step of that process. I mean, I had never even explored some of the resources that are just available in Google, and I have lost 100 hours of my life going down rabbit holes on some of that stuff, but totally worth it because, like, the things that I uncovered
You did
and
say
we
that.
I know you warned me and you're like, don't spend more than 2 hours. And like, after staying up 4 nights in a row, it was like too late. But I was like, but it did, it gave me words. It gave me fancy words. So I could sound smart. I can sound compelling. And I'm not just saying it's the right thing to do. But I thought what was so incredible, what we did was in a legal marketing space to get into some public data that we had found. And just like you just pointed out, like I remember picking up the phone and calling folks in DC and Texas and California asking about traffic patterns. And they were so excited. I think it was like the
Yeah,
first public
they're
phone
happy
call.
to help you, right? They're
Yeah,
happy
and
to
no
help
one
you.
calls them. No one calls them at all. And so they are over the moon when they're like, "Oh, you read this and you have questions about it," and they'll send you stuff
It's
that's
like,
not published
wow.
yet.
Yeah.
So like it's really like exciting and awesome. But because of all that work, we put together data and information that some of the top executives had never seen, never considered.
Mm,
We were able to show like real impacts on money and projections. And within a year, we went for like one team in particular where it was all men, save one, to the complete reverse of where we only had one male on an entire team, all the way up to the VP level. And
it was
so
incredible.
it was
What you
really, really
achieved
incredible. And they
was
were
incredible.
thriving. Yeah, these
Yes.
weren't token placements. We were able to articulate exactly why they had something unique to offer from a cultural standpoint that connected with a certain audience, that had a deep lived experience with a key target group that we were marketing towards, that we were going after, that we were making money from. And to articulate that in an entirely different way is such a gift for HR to be able to do. And I think that's why HR doesn't rise to the top, because they're siloed. They're not speaking the language of revenue and metrics and data. I mean, because at the end of the day, like this changes lives, and you had just mentioned that point about like how you look for people who have something to lose, who are hurt by something.
Yes.
And I think that's what drives me as well, is all my years in HR. Like I've seen the tears, I've seen the career destruction, devastation, I've seen families break apart. And especially in the United States, where we have these fragile safety nets, if we have one at all in our area. And so that's why people end up with complex PTSD because of workplace trauma. When our jobs are on the line, it's terrifying. And so things like
But
access to opportunity.
I want to speak to the creativity when we work together, specifically because earlier you were talking about like the bottom line, and often people are obsessed with the bottom line.
Mhm.
And as I said, I was an accountant, so we're always tracking that. What was so interesting about when we worked together is you were actually talking about how to affect the top line.
Yeah.
And obviously, that has a direct effect on the bottom line, but it was very interesting. So, if you remember, we were looking at the potential total addressable market of the
Mhm.
entire business. And this was a big deal because what we learned was that diversity stuff, which people had been disregarding, had a
Mhm.
direct impact, not only on the way that people were treated specifically and how you basically got more clients. But when we looked at the people, and this goes back to the research data you were talking about, when we looked at the people who are most likely or most vulnerable, and this
Mhm.
is relevant in your previous organization, the people who you are most likely to help, ethnicity, race played a huge issue. This was something that no one had considered. This wasn't your opinion. This wasn't my opinion. There was solid evidence there. And not only that, let's bring it back to the research. We had tactical ideas, methods, frameworks that had been tried and tested about how to communicate to specific people that you had already identified that could affect the total addressable market of the business and therefore your revenues for the next year. So this wasn't a touchy-feely, we would like to do this, or this is a passion project of myself. You built this solid case to get that buy-in. And frankly, this is for people who were motivated to hear it in that way. Now, this is not me disregarding human value. And when we think about it, we're almost putting and making people into numbers. That's an extreme way of looking at this, I think. And you can go down that road with almost anything, with any business. Oh, you're exchanging your time for money, so therefore you are worth this. No, we're talking about marketplaces. We're talking about, for the most part, profit-making organizations. And even if you're not a profit-making organization, you are required to be accountable for how you are using the resources that you have been gifted, donated, or whatever. And so I think it's very important in terms of accountability and responsibility to show as an HR leader that you care about the people, but you care about the organization, and it's in a very practical way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can serve both. I've always said that about HR. There's this common perception out there that HR only serves the company, but it's no different than, when we're ignoring DEI, because there's plenty of evidence out there that shows that organizations that completely ignore it have more race discrimination claims, have more harassment claims. So this is also about risk management. And again, that's another way of taking like these really raw feelings and then turning that into something with real dollars kind of tied to it that I think a lot of folks understand. But I also think it's just some of the realities of what we deal with. I have conversations with folks where I wish it wasn't that way, but in these spaces where we're really trying to move a needle in a tough, stubborn environment, especially in this political environment where people may have very concrete views of who's entitled to opportunity and who's not. And there's that imbalance of power. It's not enough to just say this is wrong and it's wrong. Really trying to articulate a case for saying there's going to be a penalty, there's going to be accountability, and hey, if you do this, you're also going to win. You're going to see some value of that. And I think that's the real magic in you, is like you hear these kind of top line statements out there from McKinsey and all these other ones that are saying like, hey, if you have a more diverse workforce, they're better likely to connect with a more diverse marketplace. And we are, by 2040, the United States will become a majority minority country, and
Yeah,
so
those words will have less meaning, right? In the way that we
yes.
understand them now.
Exactly. And so, like, unless you're just going to sell to one tiny shrinking demographic, you need people who can emotionally connect and have that lived experience and are embedded in and deeply understand these folks to resonate with them, to sell for them, to build products for them, all of this. And so, you really help that, take that down to a granular level, to the bite-sized pieces, and take real concrete projects and give real concrete solutions that live up to that high ideal. I mean, I know I'm probably your best example of who you've ever worked with. Are there other folks that you can think of
Say it
too?
again, Kim. Say it again.
I know. I know. Well, it's because you're so nice. You even told my daughter, I think, didn't you send her a video saying your mom is great? Like that was precious.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
saved that in
yeah.
my LinkedIn. So, maybe one
It's
day
so
she'll
true.
believe it. But yeah, but I know you have other great examples of how you've helped people. Anything come to mind right now?
Yeah, we do. Do you know what? one of the challenges I've had is that so much of the work we've done has been behind NDAs. And
Hmm.
going back to what you said earlier, is so I've got these stories and I have to kind of change bits of them or change names. But I say this to say, you were talking about lawsuits, and we often have people who visit us after they've suffered a lawsuit.
Hmm.
And actually a word of encouragement from HR. When I deal with people leaders, they often, and you were talking about risk earlier, they often don't pick up on that as a bottom line issue or something we should manage it in the sense of, hey, we can avoid this number, we can make this go down because of X if we do these three things. So I say that, and this is all, we're bringing it back to the bottom line and actually sort of access and legitimacy as well. But there are many business cases. But one of the things that we did recently, this is from another client of ours who's our other sort of archetype who we really like. This is a publishing business, and they wanted more diversity in their hiring only because they some of their publishers or some of the people who were coming on board, uh, they were pointing out that, wow, we don't feel that you actually recognize what's going on in the marketplace, and it was raised as an issue. And publishing, I say I've got this accounting background which has changed, but it used to be very lack of diversity. And you'd go from Russell Group universities, which are kind of, like what's like Harvard and all these other, what's the
Fancy
collect
schools with fancy experts.
what's the collective term? I've forgotten it now.
You're talking about
Ivy
like,
League.
yes, yes, Ivy Leagues.
Ivy League, the equivalent in the UK. So
Okay.
you've got all of those. So if you look at publishing in the UK in particular, um, it's a very tried and tested path. You can
Hmm.
almost guess the type of people who are working in there. And they
Yes.
realized that actually, as part of growing their business, they wanted more diversity and they wanted to represent London. So that this was
Mm.
a because often when people talk about representation, you don't really know or understand what they mean. In this case, they wanted to represent the market that they already served, or were, in their view, not serving well enough.
Yeah.
Some people say it's aspirational, and this is where you get the conflict because people will say, "Oh, we want more diversity," but why? Why do you want it?
Yeah, that's such a
They don't
critical
really
question.
explain it.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by diversity? It's another ambiguous
Mhm.
word that nobody really understands. So in this case, they wanted more ethnic diversity to
Mhm.
represent the city that they were located in. And so, okay, you can follow that logic. Even if you disagree, at least you understand why. And here's the interesting thing, they were doing a great job in attracting them.
Mhm.
They weren't doing a great job in terms of hiring,
Oh,
right?
interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So what we realized, and once again, we looked through a model and it said so attraction was fine. It was a selection problem they were having.
Mm.
And later on, a retention challenge as well. So
I
what
was just about,
happened?
that was my assumption. It was they were having trouble keeping them, but okay. Yeah.
But it was the bigger issue was selection.
Hmm.
And so we said, okay, what's going on? And what we found in this particular organization was they were asking people for a salary requirement. What do you want? What do you want to be paid in this role? And what they found was, from examining the data, was that people who were from underrepresented groups in that organization were always going high on salaries because often they didn't have friends or family who would apply for a job or were working in that industry. And so what they thought was, and because we actually did some interviews with some of these people, they thought that you go high
And you
and then
negotiate down.
you negotiate down. What they didn't know was that going high excluded them. If you were more than X% above the actual target, you didn't even get an interview, regardless of how good your your application was, your background was. And so we thought that's interesting. And so what
Hmm.
we did is we changed some of the criteria and we relaxed that one. The reason we felt comfortable doing that, because that wasn't excluding people based on their eligibility for the role.
Mm-hmm.
When we changed that, it dramatically, I think it was like 25% increase
Wow.
in the candidates that they were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that addressed part of their selection issue. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to give that as a real tactical example. This is something that everybody can check for themselves. And so
Right.
you often think that your process is fair or that your process is working, but you have to take a little time to examine the process. And often you need to speak to people. And this is this idea of procedural justice.
Yeah.
Is the process fair? One of the things for procedural justice is, can it be changed?
Mm-hmm.
There's a representativeness rule as well. In fact, you know what? Maybe I'll send you this. Like, there's 6 rules for something that's got procedural justice. One, is it fair? Is it ethical? Right? Does it
Mm-hmm.
do the right thing? 2, can we change it? But there's a representativeness rule as well, which is, does it represent the interests of the people who are governed by this rule? And so, if you are going to have a rule for new mothers, if we're going to come up with a rule for new mothers, and I say mothers as opposed to parents for whatever reason, right? In this specific example, would it be useful to actually speak to some new parents or new mothers? The answer is yes. If we
Yeah.
didn't, there's a great chance that this rule, this random rule we've come up with, would be unfair. And we wouldn't know because we didn't actually speak to anyone who was impacted by it. So this is just another example of, and this making an inclusive workplace, a fair workplace, but looking at methods. And this rule, the 6 things, it comes from, I think it's Leventhal. This is a research thing.
Of
It's
course.
not like
Yeah.
my idea. I discovered it during my PhD. I thought that's useful. It's one of the most practical things. What and I'm going to send it to you so you can share it with your audience. Half the time we are solving procedural justice issues.
Love that.
Yeah,
That's a
which
great
means
phrase.
the
I'm going to
rules are
remember that.
fair.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And so we'll be sure to include that in the description below for YouTube, as well as a link to all of your information and where folks can get in touch with you. But before we sign off, any final words of wisdom that you want to share with folks?
I want to encourage you to focus on 3 things. Okay, so typically when we work with people, they have trouble getting buy-in. They have trouble, they're not tracking any measurable results, and the work they're doing is not sustainable, right? So, what I would encourage you to do moving forward, if you're thinking, okay, this all sounded great, it was a great conversation, but what do I do now? Number one, try and position yourself as a trusted advisor. And so, what that means is you're going to get buy in, but you're going to speak in the language of the people and you're going to try and be fair and explain things. So, no gotchas, no guilt, no shaming. Use the language of the business to explain things in a way that they can understand. Don't assume that they read your reports. Don't assume they care about the pulse surveys. Focus on what they care about and position yourself as someone who can help them get what they want, but also in line with where the business is going. The second thing is measurable results outside of HR. That's the thing. Not just the HR reports, stuff that they care about, something you can measure. So if it's a feel good thing, no happy sheets. When you do training and it's, oh, hey, would you recommend this to someone? Are you glad you came? Did you enjoy it? None of that. We're looking for
Right.
either a change or a habit. And a quick way to do this is have a task. So after you've done this, are you going to do one of the 3 things that I'm suggesting? If you have, we can track that. If you haven't, then we would never know. And then we're going to say, well, did you like that interview? Did you like the report? We want something that's measurable. And so even if it's not measurable in the way that you want, you can make it measurable. And then the third thing is to make it systematic. Don't do not a one and done, not it's Black History Month or Cinco de Mayo, we're going to do something. What can you do each week, each month, each quarter? Something that you can do over and over again. And it doesn't typically, these things don't cost a lot of money. Yeah, the
Yes.
support often does, but what you'll be doing yourself, it doesn't cost a lot of money. So if someone's saying you need $100,000 to do this training thing, is there something you could do for like $10 or less than that? Can you read a book and try and put it into practice? And we're going to track it over the next 3 months. These are the things that I've seen that make a difference. So I want to encourage you in all of that and wish you the best moving forward.
I love it. And the same applies for lawsuits. A hard conversation is free. And so not having these hard conversations can cost staggering amounts. So really love that you're here for the prevention and so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan.
It's a pleasure, Kim, and wishing you the best. I'm excited to see what you're going to do next.
Me too.